All right. Hey, we are going to get started for week 7 of our summer roundtable conversation. We have spent the last 6 weeks talking about strengthening our marriage, and we are in the home stretch with only 2 weeks left to go. So, again, like we've said every single week, this is a conversational format. We are going to cover some hard topics, and we're also going to give you some time to have some conversations with your spouse at your table. Each week, you're going to complete a couple activity, and we have some homework items that we will tell you about that you guys are going to do this upcoming week to further strengthen your marriage and what we are specifically talking about tonight. So before we jump into that, we are going to go over some of our ground rules.
All right, and as we do that, I want to make sure everybody has all the correct handouts because technology has not been my friend today. So, you should have this handout that has the Tighten the Knot logo on the top, and on the back it should say page number 2 at the bottom. All right? Then you should have a similar looking one that says 3 on the bottom and 4 on the bottom. Okay? All right? That's the one you're least likely to have correct. Then there's one called Taking a Time Out. There's one called Allies or Adversaries. And there is one called Identifying Your Hot Topics that's stapled. And an extra question sheet. Okay? If you don't have one of those, let me know. Because it's very possible that you don't have all of the... A 1 and 2. Perfect. Okay. Here's a 1 and 2. Maybe if I can get it to... There we go. 1 and 2. That's what I was afraid of. All right. Let's go over some rules. Rule number 1, be engaged. This is a conversation. We want you to talk. The point of summer roundtable conversations is to have conversations. So, if we ask you a question, it's not rhetorical. We want you to really answer it. And if we give you an activity to do, we want you to do that activity. That is the whole point. As we talk about marriage, these questions tonight will all be directed specifically to you as a couple. Rule number 2, be kind. Okay, we're all learning this together. No one is an expert in the room, so make sure that your responses are marked with kindness. We've been talking about uncomfortable topics. Tonight is going to be one of those really uncomfortable topics, okay? You might go home fighting in the car tonight. That's very possible, okay? So, yeah, right before a holiday weekend, congratulations. Tonight's going to be a tough topic, okay? And it might cause quite a bit of tension, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So, rule number 3, this is a discussion-based study, but we don't have all night, and we're getting a late start tonight because I can't get the stream to work, so we're recording it. So, there's lots of information in the Church Center app. All of the resources that I've given you tonight are in the Church Center app, along with additional resources and a YouVersion Bible plan. So, lots of information for you to digest, and at the end of this series, so next week, we'll have a resource list for you of different books and resources that we suggest would help enhance your marriage. So, we're going to start off with some prayer, and then we're going to jump straight into it. God, thank you for tonight. Thank you for an opportunity to come together and learn more about each other and grow in our faith. God, I pray that as we discuss the hard conversation of conflict in our marriage, that our words be kind, that our conversations be fruitful, and then in all things you get the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, we are going to jump right on in with our first question. It's a little bit of a doozy, but it's fine. If you had to summarize the number 1 conflict in your marriage, what would it be? So we're going to give you a few minutes to talk about it as a couple. You might have different answers, and that's okay. Just think about the number 1 thing that causes the most tension, the most friction, the most conflict in your marriage. You also might have an answer that's like the number one conflict that's like a substantial, solid reason for conflict, and then the number one, like, stupidest reason for conflict. If you would like to know the stupidest reason in our marriage, it would be formatting and cutting straight lines. Robert, would you like to expound on your...
Both of which I do excellently. Kelly, not so much. Yes.
I do it on purpose.
If you haven't noticed, I'm very particular about how things look. And so I spend a long time making sure everything is formatted and looks the way it's supposed to look. So whenever Kelly produces something, she sends it to me, and then I reformat it to look correct. And that causes tension sometimes. All right, so misunderstanding is a natural part of marriage. No matter how deeply a man and woman love each other, they will eventually have conflict. It's simply unrealistic to expect that both people will always want the same thing at the same time. Conflict in marriage is inevitable. And for couples who know how to work it out, conflict can actually lead to a deepening sense of intimacy. The trick is knowing how to argue. Knowing how to fight fair is critical to your survival as a happy couple. Love itself is not enough to sustain a relationship in the craziness of modern life. Being in love is, in fact, a very poor indicator of which couples will stay married for the long haul. Research actually shows how well couples handle disagreements is far more important to the survival of a marriage. In our experience, most couples, and I would say even most people, don't actually know how to handle conflict well. And we'll drop this in the Church Center app, but we spent a whole summer roundtable last summer and a whole series this fall specifically on how to handle conflict in a biblical way. Many couples make the mistake of calmness and quietness for marital harmony. So they'll go out of the way to smooth out differences without actually really resolving anything. Others, having watched their parents explode at each other time and time again, they learn the wrong ways to fight. And their arguments will quickly degenerate into insults and abuse.
So tonight what we're going to do is we are going to talk and show you how to fight fairly. We're going to begin our combat training by exploring some of the common issues that tend to cause tension and friction within couples. And then we're going to talk about 4 lethal conflict styles that you should stay clear of, because while they might be the easy path, they are definitely going to do more damage to your relationship. Then we're going to talk specifically about why fighting can actually be good and healthy for your marriage. And then we're going to talk about some of the ground rules for fighting a fair fight. As we begin talking about these common issues that tend to trip couples up, there is a workbook page that you have, and it's called Identifying Your Hot Topics. We're not going to take time right now to do it, but this exercise is in there for you to do later on because it helps you to understand what pushes your buttons so that when those things come up and those buttons get pushed, you are aware and they aren't like coming out of left field and they're not a surprise, okay? The really interesting thing about conflict in marriage is that it generally takes very little to start a fight in your marriage. Have you guys ever started out with some minor, insignificant thing, and then 2 hours later, you're like, why did we even start fighting in the first place, right? These insignificant things can tear at the fabric of your relationship. Couples often bicker about things that don't actually really matter, and those things slow your momentum, which is what we've been talking about for the last 7 weeks, is your momentum in your marriage. it seems that there's some sort of universal red alert that sounds in every marriage when certain topics are broached. So whether you're a happy couple or an unhappy couple with the same topics, they can still cause tension, okay? When it comes to a big issue list, research shows, that's like very difficult to say. Research shows that money is among one of the top ranking hot topics, right? It is one of the areas that conflict comes with most couples. We're going to spend a good part of next week actually talking about finances and money, but it is something to be aware of as we talk specifically about conflict tonight. What is surprising to many couples is that money fights are not usually based in how much money they do or don't have. Couples fight about money no matter what their income is. So higher incomes can reduce stress, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you won't fight because of it. Most couples, regardless of their income, have conflicting ways of handling money. When we get to next week, you'll see one of you might be a saver and one of you might be a spender. Both of you might be a saver, or if you're like us, both of you might be a spender. And that comes with issues that you have to work through, right?
All right, so fighting is intrinsic to marriage as sex. The goal of both is to do them well, okay? What matters is how we fight, not whether we fight. Couples who stay happily married disagree just as much as couples who end up getting divorces. Married couples who fight well use their disagreements to deepen their connection. Happily married couples see each other as allies rather than adversaries. So, you will find an additional handout called Allies or Adversaries. Okay, we're going to give you some time to work through that to help you identify what a good fight is from a bad fight. All right, so we're going to give you some time to work through this at your table with each other, and then we'll continue with the conversation. All right, so look at page 14 of your Symbis. It looks like this. And at the top, you will find 2 paragraphs. If you were here last week, it's very possible that you got this sheet last week. So, did we give them? No, you still have our packets from the last 2 weeks. Oh, Kelly will get this. Okay, so you're going to look at page 14. At the top, you're going to read 2 paragraphs, okay? These paragraphs summarize how you are each hardwired to manage conflict. So what I want you to do is look at each paragraph, look at your own first, and underline any sentences that resonate with you, and cross out any sentences that do not. Then we're going to take a deeper look at this information on a practical level, and we're going to talk through these conversation questions. What does your spouse paragraph reveal about their fight type that you've never really considered before? How can this new insight help you manage conflict better? And then I want you to select 2 or 3 statements from your paragraph that you agree with and explain how they might influence conflicts that you face. Okay? So you're reading your paragraph and then you're discussing these questions amongst each other. All right. If you're not done, that's all right. We're going to keep moving on. There'll be plenty of time for you to talk through these things the rest of this week. I was reading a research study by Dr. John Gottman, who talked about how he can spot and track a couple's marital breakdown by observing how they handle conflict. And he talked about how when 4 bad omens appear in their conflict, what he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, danger is imminent because as each horseman arrives, it paves the way for the next. These 4 disastrous ways of interacting will sabotage your attempts to resolve conflict constructively. In order from least to most dangerous, they are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
Well, those sound fun. We're going to take a look at each of these, but the first one, we're going to talk specifically about complaining is a healthy part of marriage, okay? Airing a complaint, even though it is often unpleasant or even uncomfortable, it actually can make our marriages stronger in the long run, as opposed to what we tend to do, which is surpassing and bottling up the complaint and then allowing it to build over time without ever actually discussing it, okay? There's a fine line, though, between complaining and getting really close into the territory of criticism, okay? Criticism involves attacking someone's personality rather than the behavior. So when we're complaining, we can often air complaints about behavior, but when we criticize, we're taking it almost to that next personal level where we are looking at their personality. As a general rule, criticism entails blaming, making a personal attack or accusation, while a complaint is a negative comment about something that you wish was different. Okay? Complaints typically begin with the word I, while criticism usually begins with the word you. Criticism is a very short step beyond complaining, right? So it may seem like semantics, it may seem like not that big of a deal, but receiving criticism does feel worse than receiving a complaint, right? Criticism can be very toxic to your marriage when it is done over time incessantly.
And criticism often leads to contempt. Nothing will poison your marriage faster than contempt, no matter how long you've actually been together. So what separates contempt from criticism is the intention to insult or psychologically abuse your spouse. And you might be saying, well, I'm not trying to psychologically abuse my spouse. However, when you start to have contempt towards your spouse, you generally begin to manipulate your spouse to do or say things that you want them to do or say, which is psychological abuse, okay? This aims right at the heart of the person and ends up destabilizing the relationship and causing immense pain. When contempt appears, it overwhelms the marriage and it actually overshadows every positive feeling that partners have for each other. Some of the most common expressions of contempt are name-calling, hostile humor, and mockery. Once these enter a relationship, your marriage goes from bad to worse.
Once you hit contempt, that then leads into defensiveness, which always makes matters worse. When both parties feel victimized by each other, neither one is willing to take responsibility to make things right. That's when you become defensive. If you are constantly bombarded with insults, what do? You naturally want to defend yourself. And one of the reasons that defensiveness can be so destructive to your marriage is when it becomes a reflex, right? The victim is reacting instinctively, and they don't see anything wrong with being defensive. But defensiveness can then escalate a conflict rather than resolve it.
And once you become defensive, it often leads to stonewalling. And men you are more prone to be stonewallers. In fact, research shows 85% of people who stonewall are actually men. Okay? The feeling of being overwhelmed by your emotions, and then they will start to withdraw by presenting a stonewall response to their partner. And then they try to keep their faces immobile, they avoid eye contact, they hold their necks rigid, and they avoid nodding their head or making even the smallest sounds to indicate that they are listening. Stonewallers often claim that they're not trying to make things worse, but they don't seem to realize that stonewalling is a powerful act in itself. It conveys disapproval, icy distance, and smugness. Once routine interactions have deteriorated to this extent, the marriage becomes very fragile, and it requires a good deal of hard work in order to save it. Now, keep in mind, anyone can stonewall or become defensive or contemptuous or critical. Even very happy couples have these behaviors occasionally when they get into an intense marital conflict. The real danger is letting these interactions become a habit in your marriage.
And I would say that while statistics say stonewallers tend to be men, I myself am a stonewaller. Am I not? You can shake your head. Yes, it's okay. I won't hit you.
Not generally. I don't think you're
Really?
generally. No.
Oh, okay. Surprise me. Anyway, all right. We can all benefit from knowing when it's time to fight versus when it's time to take a timeout. Okay? As soon as one of the two of you starts to feel too upset or too negative to follow healthy problem-solving steps, it's immediately time to take a break. Okay? Experts agree that or say that agreeing ahead of time to take a timeout is crucial, because once you hit that point, it's better to take a timeout. Otherwise, it's going to start a downward spiral in which the conflict is just going to get greater and more intense.
And this is something I struggle with because I hate taking a timeout. I would much rather fight to the death than walk away angry, okay? But Kelly is not like this at all. She is not at all like that. So I have learned to adjust how I handle conflict, and I think I am a better person because of it.
Aw, I think you're a better person because of me too. That's so nice. No, I need time to process. I was asked the other day to provide 3 words that describe myself. In the last one, it took me so much time to think about 1 and 2 that the 3rd word I gave was overthinker because I just need that time. And so my instinct when fighting arises is to just shut down. And maybe that's why I think I'm a stonewaller. Maybe I'm not actually stonewalling. I just tend to shut down. However, I know that Robert is a verbal processor. If you don't know that, he likes to talk. And that doesn't stop when he's angry, right? And so in order for us to fight fairly, I have to internally weigh whether something is important enough that I need to pause and I need to process, or if it's something like we said earlier where it's pretty insignificant, then I just need to go ahead and suck it up and I need to have that fight because that's a way for me to show love to him, right? So if I need to process and it's something like pretty substantial, then I will say I need to stop and I need us to take this break. And he knows that while it's hard for him, he knows that that's what needs to be done because I try to make a habit of not playing that card unless I need to play that card. Does that make sense? Is that fair? So usually I can put my preferences aside and go ahead and verbally argue with something. And when I do that, we actually move through it a lot faster. However, if it is something larger and I do need time to process and I don't say that and I don't take that time, then it can do more damage because then we start a downward spiral. What's important here in all of this is to know yourself. You need to know how you process. You need to know what what is going to be beneficial for you to say, what's not going to be beneficial for you to say. But then you also have to know your spouse, and you have to figure out how to best address topics based on how you both react. And I don't know if it's easier to be like on total opposite ends like we are, or if it's to be the same. Like there's no easy way to fight.
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons to both. I think the important thing is learning to adjust to your spouse. So I know that I need to verbally process. Sometimes that means I need to go verbally process by myself, where I won't say anything hurtful. Kelly needs time to process. I want to process out loud. And so knowing that about each other is a key to learning how to fight fairly. Because if I try to force her to verbally process out loud when she's not ready to, we begin to fight about things that weren't the original fight that we started. And so when we're counseling couples, we often ask them to pick a code word to help their spouse understand that they need a break. One spouse will say the code word like fumble, and the other spouse is supposed to stop the conversation, separate, and then come back to regroup. And this is a challenge for every couple, which is why we tell them to pick a code word, because simply saying, I need to take a break, oftentimes results in another fight about why you need to take a break. Okay? Those words, I need to take a break, often escalate the conflict. So maybe your next time when you're in a conflict, you need to call a fumble. So we're going to talk through some couple connect questions. What I want you to do is discuss with your spouse how each of you process and whether you need to process out loud or if you need time to process internally. Are you the same? Are you different? What challenges do you see in that regard? Do these similarities and differences make it easier or more difficult to fight fairly? And what code word can you use to let the other know that we need to take a break from our current conflict?
All right, on page 14 of your Symbis, take a look at the middle section. These are your individual personal conflict challenges, okay? These are things that can limit your ability to successfully manage conflict. So you're going to take a few minutes to answer this question. What do you resonate with the most from each list? So take a look at yours, take a look at your spouse's, and use your pen or highlighter or something, like which one stands out to you the most for yourself and your spouse, and then talk about that together. All right, regardless of whatever your list of challenges say, we know that we can benefit from knowing when it's time to fight and when it's time to not fight. In other words, we all need to know when it might be best to take a time out before the fighting begins. Because for a good fight to occur, you both have to be ready. Sometimes when faced with a conflict, we are more ready to crumble than rumble. Look at you.
Rhyming.
That's so nice. A bad fight always leads to crumbling, while a good rumble is another story, right? The question.
It's called pastoral alliteration.
That's so wonderful. Again, Robert said he spends too much time on projects. I think that's literally an example.
Yeah, my last one. You may wait until the last minute to complete projects, frustrating your spouse. Probably because I'm formatting everything perfectly.
Whatever. Perfectly. So readiness can be really tricky when you also put, this is the sentence I have to read. When a verbal skirmish, is that a word, Andrea? A skirmish?
Yeah, it's like a tiff or a battle.
You're a teacher.
Skirmish. Like in a...
She's a...
yeah. Like think about, Confederates and Union soldiers coming together, just a little...
Okay, Grandpa.
Whatever.
Listen, here's what it says. I'm going to read it word for word and pretend like I have read this sentence before. When a verbal skirmish hijacks...
I'll read it. When a verbal skirmish hijacks our conversation and we're about to get embroiled in conflict, we don't typically stop and ask ourselves if we're ready for it.
I was not ready for that sentence.
Great wisdom.
Whatever. Okay. Those are big words. I didn't even know I could be boiled by a conflict. Okay, but but there are some ways to tell if you are ready to rumble. If you're emotionally amped up, or you're irritable, or you're hungry, or if you're PMSing, you're bound to have a bad fight, right? Like, let's be honest. It's not probably the best time to have that fight when it's that time, okay?
So this is a hint to all you husbands. Track Shark Week. Okay, I'm just saying. If you track Shark Week, you are prepared.
This is true. Okay. The odds are going to be stacked against you. On top of that, some of us who have a more aggressive personality may trick ourselves into believing that we're ready to jump into a fight when really you are not. So there's a simple checklist for deciding if you're ready or not to have a conflict, okay? These things are on your paper on the bottom of page 2 of your note sheet, okay? So if you agree with any of the statements during a conflict, you are not ready to fight, okay? Because it is not going to end well, I promise. I'm hungry or I'm in pain. I'm tired or exhausted. I'm emotionally charged, or I'm pressed for time, or I need to think. Only one of those statements needs to be true in order for a good fight to not be ready to take place, or a healthy fight to not take place. So we're going to explore the idea of taking a time out a little bit more. You have a handout sheet called Taking a Time Out? ? You are going to take a look at that. We're going to give you about 10 minutes to go through it, and then we'll come back together.
All right. As soon as one person in a couple feels too upset or negative to follow healthy problem-solving step, it's time to take a break. So here's some essentials for having a productive timeout. We've put this starting at the beginning or at the bottom of page 2 and into page 3. I've laid out all these essentials for you rather than having you write them down. Number 1, include in your agreement the understanding that you'll get back to your discussion within 24 hours. That means when you take a time out, you can't be like, okay, we're taking a time out, and then you never talk about it again, okay? It's not a forever timeout. It's 24 hours, okay? If you're the one ready to blow up, stop the conflict by simply saying, I need a timeout, or use the code word. Some couples will even do the little T for timeout to indicate that they need a break. Affirm your intention to solve the problem together later. In other words, don't just walk away. Okay? Say something like, hey, I want to resolve this, but I can't right now. I'll let you know when I'm ready. Okay? Stop the discussion right away and go somewhere where you can calm down. Research shows it takes 20 minutes for the body to slow itself down after being worked up. Okay? So if you are angry, that doesn't mean I'm going to walk away for 5 minutes and then my spouse is going to follow me into the room and we're going to start fighting again. You need at least 20 minutes to calm down. Take a walk, read a book, cook a meal, take a bath. Don't spend your time ruminating. See, I'm trying to use that word that Bill taught me multiple times as much as I can now. Don't spend your time ruminating about the conversation or having bad thoughts about your spouse. Okay? Do something productive during that break, okay? Go for a walk, sit in the bathtub, whatever it is. Don't just sit there and stew. Let your spouse, even with a small text or email, though it would be better to do it verbally, when you are ready to re-engage. Say something like, I'll be ready to continue in an hour, or I'll be ready before dinner tonight. Setting a deadline for the timeout to end is essential. It cannot just be an indefinite timeout on that subject. And then if possible, before you talk again, try to first share an everyday activity together to reestablish a close and calm connection, right? So during that timeout, after you've taken your 20 minutes to cool down, do the dishes together, unless that's what started the fight. Or do something together that requires you to be close, but doesn't require you to continue fighting or arguing about whatever it is that started that fight, so that you can reestablish a connection in a healthy way rather than jumping back into a fight. It is impossible to have a rational discussion in a climate of hostility or disrespect. Taking a time out is one of the easiest ways to rekindle respect for your spouse and to keep a fight from escalating. So don't be afraid to cool off, calm down, and gain some perspective when you begin to overheat.
And we said this earlier, but couples literally fight about anything and everything. Sometimes those issues are very trivial and very small, while sometimes they might be big life decisions that you're disagreeing on. So if you take a look at the bottom of page 14 of your Symbis, you are going to find a section called Hot Topics. Okay? These are things that are going to be hot button, hot topic issues that you are likely going to have conflict over. Okay, so you're going to take a few minutes, read through your list, read through your spouse's list, and then I want you to star or highlight or circle the ones that show up on both of your lists. Okay, so look for those patterns that show up on both. Talk with your spouse about how can knowing these topics spark tension help you in the future. And then think back on a conflict that maybe occurred around each of those common topics, and how would you, think back on the conflicts. Oh, okay. And then talk about how you would gauge their importance. Are they actually things that you should spend time fighting about, arguing about? Are they really hot topics, or are they more those trivial things that maybe you let escalate too far?
Yeah, so that last question at the bottom, instead of rather, it's supposed to probably say the word rate. How would you rate their importance?
All right, hopefully you can see the value of gauging how important a particular topic is when you're fighting about it. This simple recognition tool can help you determine whether something is worth fighting about or not. And like we said, you can fight about the trivial things. Like, fighting is okay, but it's how the trivial things escalate into bigger things that matters, that we need to pay attention to. So we have an additional handout for you that you are going to do this week. We're not going to do it right now, but it's called Sharing Withholds. And this is an exercise that will help you to minimize conflicts and to increase your intimacy as a couple.
It is stapled to the back of your identifying hot topics. So it's one of your workbook exercises to do this week. All right? Conflict is a social taboo. It's considered morally wrong by some. The assumption that conflict doesn't belong in a healthy relationship is based partly on the idea that love is the polar opposite of hate. But emotional intimacy involves feeling both love and hate, of wanting to be close and needing to be separate, or agreeing and disagreeing. Partners who refuse to accept that conflict is part of their marriage miss opportunities to creatively challenge and be challenged by each other. They also risk more negative consequences down the road. Unresolved, unhandled conflict acts as a cancer and erodes the passion, intimacy, and commitment of a marriage, which we talked about several weeks ago when we talked about the marriage triangle. Couples who do not make an issue of things often resort to anger substitutes rather than dealing directly with their emotions. So that means they will either overeat, they'll get depressed, they'll gossip, they'll end up having physical illness as a result of not dealing with the issues in their marriage. While these substitutes may be more socially acceptable than a direct expression of anger, they can result in what experts call a devitalizing marriage, where false intimacy is the most that couples can hope for. The point is that marital conflict is a necessary challenge to be met rather than avoided. We'll say it again. Conflict is natural in intimate relationships. Once this is understood, conflict no longer represents a crisis, but an opportunity for growth. Conflict can result in growing closer together. Conflict is the price that you pay for a deepening intimacy in your marriage. When you learn to fight fair, your marriage can flourish.
So now we're going to talk specifically about how to fight fair. We're going to talk about how to fight a good fight, and the formula to that we're going to share is research that has been done with thousands of couples across the country. There's two psychologists from the University of Denver, and they have predicted with about 80% accuracy who will be divorced in 6 or 7 years after marrying. What these psychologists, I cannot speak tonight. What these psychologists are looking for is whether or not a couple argues, but how they specifically argue. So not if you argue, but how you do argue, okay? Their research, we know not only what unhappy couples are doing wrong when they argue, but this also shares what happy couples are doing correctly. Successful couples who resolve conflict without leaving scars because they have learned how and do fight a good fight will stick closely to these rules that we're going to talk about. The first rule for fighting a good fight is don't run from strife. Many of us seem to get meaner and more dangerous the longer we have our grievances bottled up. So don't allow yourself to bury something that irritates you. This goes back to it's okay to air a grievance, right? It's not okay to criticize. Repressed irritations have a higher rate of resurrection. That means they're going to keep coming up if you don't get them out, okay? Happy couples may disagree strongly, but they don't shut their partners out. When one spouse brings up an issue, the other listens attentively. Remember our conversation a few weeks ago about communication. From time to time, a partner who is listening should paraphrase what the speaker says to make sure that the message is understood. When couples can do this, and they are comfortable taking a brief time out to gain some perspective, they can do that successfully. But again, they have to come back and agree to continue to talk it out or continue to fight it out after that amount of time has passed.
All right, rule number next, choose your battles carefully. For many partners, marriage is a magnifying glass. Couples who are virtually certain to break up can't seem to find a relaxed, reasonable, efficient way of fighting out how to settle differences as small as which movie to go see or whose friends they're going to go visit. So take an expert's advice and choose your battles carefully. One of the major tasks of marriage is learning what can and should be changed. Habits of nagging, for example, is something that can and should be changed in your relationship. And what should be overlooked, like the way a spouse squeezes the toothpaste out of a tube, is an insignificant issue that you can just overlook. So part of being married is learning what you can and should change in your relationship and what insignificant things you need to let go. About 90% of the issues you and your spouse bicker about can probably be overlooked. We know how easy it is to criticize our spouse. So don't sweat the small stuff. You have to ask yourself with every single fight, is this fight worth it? Also, as you're choosing your battles, it's always helpful to consider whether the issue you're about to gripe over is related to a gender difference, like we talked about last week, or one of those unspoken rules or unconscious role expectations that we talked about in week 2. Sometimes, if we can just recognize that this issue we're dealing with is a difference of opinion because of our gender or because of our childhood expectations of a spouse, that will help you relax and not fight over something insignificant.
All right, rule number 3, I think, is where we're at, is to define the issue clearly. Many couples find themselves bickering on a regular basis over anything and could be everything, right? No issue is too small or too big to fight over. But the next time that you have a fight, whether it's big or small, try this, okay? When you feel the tension rising, ask each other to define clearly what the fight is about until both of you understand the issue. Marital battles become habitual if the source of the conflict is not identified. But once the couple can identify the issue, they will then open up and be more upfront about what's actually bothering them. Once the conflict is clearly defined, it often can take care of itself. For example, if we're fighting about something and it is the way that I perceived what Robert said, if I say, well, you said it this way, if he just says, that's not what I meant, I'm sorry, that resolves the issue, right? So to identify real sources of conflict, you have to address the questions, what are we really fighting about? And what's the real source of our disagreement? When couples don't address or can't actually pinpoint the answer to those questions, then the fight is often displaced to another topic, sending you on another fight. So before you fight, make sure that you actually know what you're fighting about.
All right, the next one is state your feelings directly. The next time you're in a conflict and you're trying to state your feelings, try this XYZ formula. So think about approaching it sort of like a game in which you fill in the blanks with your particular gripe in mind. So in situation X, when you do Y, I feel Z. For example, when you are on the road, which is the X, and you don't tell me that you miss me, which is the Y, I feel unloved and lonely. Okay? When you use this formula, it will help you avoid insults and character assassination, and it allows you instead to simply state how your partner's behavior affects your feelings.
The next rule for fighting a good fight is to rate the intensity of your feelings. Often in relationships, one partner is often more expressive than the other. That means that one person articulates their feelings more quickly and more intensely than others. We've seen that this can provide an imbalance, and that imbalance can cause problems time and time again, because what is very important to one person may appear to not be important to the other one at all. So a helpful tool that you can use is called the conflict card, which is in your notes. I think it's top of page 4. So this conflict card can help couples to get on even ground when it comes to expressing the intensity of their feelings. On the card is a scale from 1 to 10, ranking the intensity of a person's feelings. Okay, so you can read 1 through 10. 1 is I'm not enthusiastic. It's not a big deal, right? It's very chill, very relaxed. Then as you progress, the higher the number, the bigger the ordeal is, or the bigger the expression is, okay? So anytime a heated exchange occurs, a couple can simply pull out this list, and they can read through it and self-assess and rank the depth of their disagreement. By rating the conflict, you can actually level the playing field, even if one person is more expressive than the other. This also helps if one person tends to need more time to process than the other, right? This could help balance out that fighting. When you use the conflict card, if you both rank an issue at a 7 or higher, you should seek help from an objective person, like a pastor, a marriage therapist. The higher the number, the more help you might need in addressing an issue, because it might be too big of a deal for you to solve on your own.
Okay, rule number next. Give up put downs. Remember the childhood saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That's a lie. Names do hurt, as many unhappy couples can testify. Unfortunately, couples are generally experts at character assassination. They know exactly all of the little flaws that their partner has, and they can use those against you if you decide to fight unfairly. Put downs are especially lethal when they attack an Achilles heel. For instance, if your spouse has confessed to you that in high school they had cruel classmates who called them an egghead. That means in adulthood, if they still have a fear about socially being clumsy, then you can't call your spouse an egghead, because it's going to bring up all of those feelings from their adolescence. 2 Achilles heels that are mentioned so often that they are almost universal in every couple is sexual performance and parents. It's tricky enough in life's mellowest moments to discuss sexual dissatisfaction with your spouse, but to use it as part of an argument is a terrible idea. And even though we're allowed to criticize our own parents, it's generally a bad idea for your spouse to be the one criticizing your parents. The sad facts of close relationships is that we often treat the ones that we love the most worse than we treat anyone else in our life. We're more likely to hurl insults at our marriage partner than any other person in our life. We're often even more polite to acquaintances than we are to our spouses. Here are a few tips for cultivating politeness in your marriage, which I've put on your handout for you. Start by greeting each other with an acknowledgement and warm hello, and mark leaving with a tender goodbye. Here's what that means. When I wake up in the morning, I say good morning. I say I love you. If we know we're going to go somewhere different, we always say goodbye, I love you when we leave, okay? When your partner has done a chore, always show appreciation for the job, even if the way it was done doesn't meet your approval. okay? Or even if it's something that's an expectation, say, hey, thanks for washing the car, rather than you missed a spot, okay? Surround meal times with conversations. So that means shut off your phone and actually pay attention to your spouse. Research has shown that it takes only one put down to undo hours of kindness that you have given to your partner. So the most gracious offering of politeness that you can give your partner is to avoid put downs altogether.
The next one, the next rule for fighting a good fight is don't dwell on downers. When you are in a fight, stick closely to the relevant issue and try to end the fight. So many of the couples that we talk to, whether in just day-to-day conversation or like at our kitchen table in a counseling session, end up having the same fight over and over again because they never actually finish the fight when it happens. This can be because your discussion gets off course. This could be because you didn't set a time limit as to how long your timeout needed to be. But you have to refocus your conversation, okay? Try to calm your partner down without saying the words calm down, because that never works, ever, right? Unhappy couples turn every spat into a slippery slope of an argument that ends in a different place than it started. This is runaway venting that can be one of the strongest predictors of divorce. When couples veer off into heated, unproductive fighting over unresolved issues, they end up resolving nothing. Their feelings are raging. Someone maybe says, calm down, and that totally doesn't work. Then you get into an argument that matters. They're going to shut down, okay? If you dwell on downers, then you eventually will sink. You won't be able to swim in your marriage.
And it's important to remember it's not how you exit an argument, it's not how you get into an argument that matters as much as how you exit an argument. There's a quote that says, "Smooth seas do not make skillful sailors." This applies to exactly what we're talking about tonight. Not fighting is not an option. Not fighting does not make a happy or successful marriage. Refusing to fight or pretending like you don't fight can be detrimental to your marriage. When a couple tells me they never fight,
liars,
that's a sure sign that they're lying. And it's also a sure sign that they have an extremely unhealthy marriage. Your marriage is not healthy if you do not fight. In fact, oftentimes when we're in a coupling session or when we're in a counseling session with a couple, I say, my goal is to make you fight. Because fighting, when it's done correctly, when it's done fairly, ends in resolution, and you begin to solve problems that are in your marriage. If you never fight, your marriage is unhealthy. What we can do is know where the deep and shallow waters are and learn how to sail in them, regardless of what the water is like. Let's face it, all is not fair in love and war. Clean and constructive fighting is better than down and dirty fighting for sure. Throughout the course, though of course we are bound to slip and try, I'm going to start over. Of course, we are bound to slip up, so try to follow the rules that we just shared with you to learn how to have a good, healthy fight. So, as we wrap up tonight, a couple homework assignments. In the Church Center app, there's a video session 6 for you to watch. I've actually dropped 2 video sessions if you are remarried or working through a blended family. I've dropped a couple additional videos for you that I think will be helpful. Make sure you do your extra question sheet and your workbook exercises. Okay? And we have a little gift for you to help you remember to fight a good fight, to fight fairly. We've got you some little boxing gloves. You have to share. Okay, we've got a red and a black pair for each of you so that you can remember to fight fairly and have a good fight. All right. Anybody have any questions? Oh, that was almost a ringer. That would have been super impressive. Anyone have any questions that we did not cover? Anything you don't understand? Wow. You almost made it in the bucket. Nice. You probably should not play basketball. Hey, if you want to go back and watch, she's breaking things now. If you want to go back and watch this, like I said, we didn't stream tonight because the internet was being crazy. So we've recorded it, and I will get it uploaded, and hopefully by tomorrow at some point it'll post in the app for you to rewatch. All right? Don't throw that far. Here, hang on. Let me just take out the other one for you. Let me take this box. All right, now try. Close.
Sorry, Andrea. I almost took your head off.
There you go. All right. I'm going to pray, and then we will be dismissed. God, thank you for tonight. Thank you for an opportunity for us to come together as we talk about this difficult discussion of conflict in our marriage. Help us to fight fairly. Help us to have a good fight when conflict arises so that our marriage can grow deeper and more healthy, and our marriage can be a better reflection of who you are in our lives and a reflection of how you love us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.